Hello, I'm David and I'm the minister here at Glen Innes Anglican Church. A number of years ago, my wife and I went on a holiday. We were going to New Zealand, to Napier in particular. My wife was involved in a show there, so we thought we'll make a holiday of it, and it was a wonderful time. But on the way, something a little bit unexpected happened. You see, we landed very late one evening in Auckland, and we were not flying out until the next afternoon. And so we got up early with a day to kill, thought we're not going to waste this, we'll go into Auckland and have a look around. Now, I'm not a big lover of cities, and so we went in there and I kind of expected we'd grab a coffee, see a couple of sights, and then we'd race back to the airport in time to get our flight and get to the real destination that we were excited about. But what happened was we ended up at the ferry terminal and on a ferry to a little place that neither of us had heard of, a place called Waiheke Island. Now, we knew it was going to be special as we pulled in to the dock at Waiheke because you could look down and see the bottom of the water. You could see all the way down. It was like looking to glass, so crystal clear. And then as we got off, we walked out and we saw the wildlife, which was beautiful. And then we got to the main street and there were great little shops and cafes and wonderful scenery. And in fact, we found a great cafe where we were able to look out over the water, and I had possibly the best steak sangria I have ever had. It was an amazing thing. Sometimes we find these unexpected gems in unexpected places. Now, I think we're in one of those unexpected places right now where there's a great good, a great gem to be found. There's no doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has ground our lives to a halt. So much of what we've taken for granted for as long as we can remember was cut off in the space of a few short press conferences. And people are frustrated. Each morning on my run, I put my headphones in and through my phone I listen to ABC in Sydney, the radio station, where there's a bit of talkback and all the talk, all the news is focused on coronavirus, is focused on the lockdown, and people are frustrated. When will I be able to visit my family? When can I send the kids to school? When will the beaches be open again so that we can all go and laze about? And of course, Christians have our own frustrations. We're not immune, are we? In particular, for a month or so now, we haven't been able to meet together, and that's frustrating. There's something about being together as God's people, about fellowship with one another, that no Zoom meeting, no YouTube service, no phone call can quite replace. Physical presence and proximity, these things are deeply important and we miss them. And yet in this moment, I believe God is giving us a wonderful chance to share our faith. Now, God always works in unexpected ways. It's his common mode of operation. There's a great story in Acts 8. Acts talks about the early stages of the church. It begins with Jesus ascending and the giving of the Spirit, and the early church begins to spread this message, and it's a wonderful message, and people's lives are being changed, and the church is growing as people come to know the great news of Jesus. Now, there's hard times, but for the most part, things are looking up until chapters 6 and 7, when one of the number, Stephen, he is arrested, and he's taken before the Jewish court where they want to give an account for his faith. And so Stephen gets up to give his account, but rather than being meek and mild and going off into the sunset, he very firmly says, "No, I believe in Jesus." He tells them the story. Well, this incenses his opponents. They stone him to death on the spot. And we're told at that moment, as chapter 8 opens, that this has emboldened the enemies of the church. And in fact, a great persecution breaks out, which drives many of the believers from Jerusalem out into the surrounding areas in search of a bit of safety. Now, at this point, the church might have thought so much of their hard work was done. So much of it had been ended. They might have looked at it and thought, now how will we continue to spread the gospel message? How will we continue to tell people this great news of Jesus? We've been forced out. Our lives are in danger. Things are not what they were. And yet what we find in chapter 8 is a sudden explosion of the gospel in unexpected ways. There's a great story in the later part of chapter 8 of a man by the name of Philip. He's one of the number who is driven out of this area, and God takes him to a certain place where he's walking along near this road and he sees a chariot, so he comes up next to the chariot. It turns out that on the chariot is a very high-ranking official from the Ethiopian government, and he's sitting there reading the scroll of Isaiah, and in particular those great words in chapter 53. And so Philip goes next to him and he says, "Do you understand what you're reading?" To which the man replies, "Well, no, how can I understand unless someone explains it to me?" So at that point, Philip hops up and takes that moment to explain what he knows of the gospel. Now this man, this Ethiopian man, becomes a Christian, and it's a wonderful story. Now maybe you thought when the church doors were forced to close that put pause on our efforts to spread the gospel. Maybe you thought so much of our normal programs, so much of how we would normally share our faith with people, well, that's come to an end. We're going to have to wait until we're allowed to do that again. But if I've learned anything from this last few weeks online, is that as we post things online, there are many people asking questions who normally wouldn't come to our church services, who wouldn't come to things that we put on. There are people interacting with videos who are asking questions. And that's not just true of me, that's true of many of my friends who are doing the same thing. It's true of many people who I know. And this gives us the wonderful opportunity that God has presented. Because we might ask, like Philip, as God has driven us out of our building and into the rest of the world, who are the people who he has put in our paths? Who are the people who we see over the fence? Our neighbours. Who are the people who we still work with? Who are the people we might be regularly calling? Who are the people who we find on our Facebook friend list? These are people who God has put in our way, and many of them are asking serious questions. Many of them are asking these questions much more urgently than they normally would. And so how can we creatively share the gospel with them? Of course, we can't do our normal thing, not all of what we would normally do. That's not an option right now. But that's okay. We need to be creative. But we need to do it remembering that we have a great message of hope in a time of hardship. I mean, who's on your friends list that you can share some Christian content on Facebook with? That might get a conversation started. Can you, when you're on the phone next, offer to be praying for somebody so that they know you're a Christian, that they know you're thinking about these things and that you care for them? Can that get a conversation going? Or even as you're out the back doing your gardening or just relaxing and you see the neighbour over the fence, how can we engage with them so that they know of our faith and we can get the conversation going? Sometimes we find unexpectedly good things in unexpected places. I found it when I went to New Zealand, and right now I believe God's given us one of those moments. And so let's pray that God would help us to grasp hold of them for his honour and his glory.